Is this on?
Test.
You'd think we'd been here all day. Hi, everyone. I'm Lani Santo. I'm the CEO of Footsteps, and I have the privilege of holding space for a conversation. Naomi reached out, and first Naomi and Zalman said, would you be on the panel? And then they said, actually, can you moderate the panel? And I'm sure. What's the panel, Naomi? Tell me about this panel, the conversation you want to have. So I don't think this is really a panel. This is a conversation. The description, the intended description of this is how can we leverage the social capital and unique wisdom and perspectives of OTD leaders to the broader community? How can we help secular and liberal Jewish communities connect with OTD talent? This will be an exploratory conversation about whether we should create some sort of initiative that could partner with other institutions to provide a speakers bureau mentorship opportunities for OTD professionals and community for established scholars, artists, and activists. So basically, the conversation that we're about to have, and we're missing one person on stage, but Elad will come when Elad appears, is what's next? So we do a conference, and then what, right? Do I have that right, Naomi?
Yes.
Okay.
Should I say something about how I came to conceive of this?
Yeah, I was gonna start with asking you that question, Naomi, and then I'm gonna ask everyone who's on stage. I'm not reading bios because you can find those in the program. I'm gonna ask everyone who's on stage after you speak, Naomi, to share why you think you were asked to be on this panel. What is the unique perspective that you have to offer in this time? And before we get started, I will say that Shaul has another place he needs to be that's equally as important to this space, maybe, at 3, so he's gonna have to leave the conversation a little early, and that's okay, because we're gonna be in group conversation by then, and so what happens in the next hour and a half will be what happens. So yeah, Naomi, tell us what you're...
So the largest source of income for this conference is something called the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And so this was not the first place that I threw this idea out, but this is the place that had, this being Canada, which I describe as a kind of progressive kindergarten. Everybody gets a prize. So because this was a government institution, I had to pitch this. First of all, I had to explain why it had to be in New York as opposed to Toronto. And it was like we could fly in a lot of people from New York, or we could fly in a few people from Canada into New York and just hopefully fill up a room, which we will later, I hope. And I also had to say what this might mean in terms of the government's kind of ideas of a useful product. And I know what it is for me. For me, it's worth probably 10 years of therapy to be in this space. But for the Canadian government, I had to say that there was some sort of policy initiative that could emerge from this occasion. So that's why you get this kind of weird language where I promised that we would have a policy discussion. But who knows, maybe something that you write for an application ends up being very useful. So that's the impetus for this.
Beautiful, beautiful. So how many people in this room, and I can't see Zoom, I'm sorry, but I'm assuming there are people on Zoom. How many people in this room have just started to be here today? Okay, a good deal. Where we've been so far, just to land us in where we are right now, is there was a conversation about activism after Orthodoxy, and then there was a conversation about religion and spirituality, and Shaul, something else you might want to add. That was a beautiful conversation you had. So there were 2 conversations earlier, and there are many conversations that are going to follow. So this is sort of like a closing conversation in the middle of the day for where would we go next from having this beautiful movement of people after they come together and conceptualize ideas like what to do next, all right? So I'm going to ask Naomi, I think we know why you're on the panel. but I'm going to ask the question, like, what perspective, what unique perspective do each of you bring to this conversation, and include some bio background in there so that people can have a sense of who you are beyond your bio that they have on paper. And why don't we start with Naomi, and we're just going to start with going around, and then I'll mix it up.
So I guess there are two of us professors on this panel, but I'm a professor at the University of Toronto. And I mean, I studied Hebrew and Yiddish in comparative literature, BA, MA, PhD. So it was really, let's say, the skills that Yiddish was my first language, and Hebrew was something I learned in Beis Yaakov. I sometimes joke that I monetized my unhappy childhood. And so these skills are really a pathway for me to have made a life for myself. And I'm not somebody who needs the services of a place like Footsteps. I mean, I did, but that was a while ago. I own my own home, in Berkeley, California. But what I do see myself in the position of is that I've been sitting in my office at the various universities that I've taught at, and people have come to me and said, I heard there's an OTD professor here. Sometimes they want to give me Shabbos candles if they're Chabad. I get that too. But it's like, I want what you have. I want to figure out how to get a degree. And I'm like, do you have a BA? No, I don't have a high school diploma. And on the other hand, so on the one hand, they're totally unqualified. On the other hand, they're super qualified. For instance, I have a Beis Yaakov project, which is one of my research projects is about the Beis Yaakov school network, the Orthodox Girls School Network. And these are people who are perfectly situated to help me, if they're still from, they can get me on the inside so I can do real research on the inside. Or if they're, if they went to a Beis Yaakov, they have their own. So these are people who would be really useful to me, and yet there's a total mismatch between the way universities and colleges see qualifications and the way I see them. And one of the things that it's occurred to me is just like we need, and I know there's been talk about that, and I don't know where the Hunter College initiative is. Do you want to say a word or two about that? So there definitely have been initiatives through universities to bring in people, not just OTD people, but from people too, to help them, to help people on all sides, so that it isn't just people on the outside looking at Orthodoxy and making art about it, making scholarship, but there's some engagement has to happen. And and one of the issues that I have is that at the University of Toronto, there are from students, and they're all studying to become dentists or lawyers. And there's just this sense that Jewish studies is actually not a place for either from people, and then OTD people don't know. And I don't want to say that if you're OTD, you have to get a degree in Jewish studies. But so one thought I had was that those of us who have had some kind of success in this world, we're not being utilized because we're few and far between, and who are we, and what happens when we all sit on the same stage and try to figure this thing out together.
Thanks. Go ahead, Elad.
Hi, Elad, Nehorai. It's interesting for me because this is the first time I've really been in an ex-Orthodox space, actually since I was Orthodox, but it's been about...
Welcome.
Thank you.
What do you think?
Love it, love it. I was actually, this is like maybe related to this project, but I was loving how from it felt in here, where there was like people talking in the back, and there was like people giving long speeches when there were supposed to be questions. It was like
kids running around.
Yeah, this is so, I love it, so Jewish. But yeah, I think the thing that the reason I bring that up is because I feel like I don't know if it's a unique experience, but a different experience than a lot of people had, where because I moved to Long Beach during COVID, which was like not Jewish, and we were completely alone. I had this like 2-year experience completely separated from anything, not just the Jewish world, but anything. And then after that, I moved to LA, where I was living in a Jewish community, but I think I thought they don't have, for better or for worse, there's not the, OTD. There are OTD people, but there's not an OTD community. And I agree it's problematic, but we got to use something. So
we're all agreeing. We're just going to use it for now. And
I like it.
one day we'll fix it.
we'll
One day.
have that over later, drinks, coffee, whatever, we can talk about.
Perfect.
The term.
Could be another session.
Yeah.
So I actually feel like that both there was a detriment to it, of course, in terms of loneliness, but I also think there is some wisdom I hope I gained from it that I want to pass on, because I feel like one of the big, I don't know, issues, but one of the things I think an opportunity for our community to have is to learn, to unlearn some of the dynamics, because I still think that part of what exists can sometimes extend some of the things we're trying to leave behind. And I really hope and believe that as we talk more and connect more, we can start to break out of that. And so what I mean by that, I'll get to it more later once we talk more, but I think very often there can be an insularity that's not necessary. There's so much wisdom outside of the OTD community of other OTDers. There's a vast community out there.
Stay tuned for the next session.
Oh, all right, perfect. Love it. And I think also we have a lot of wisdom to share with other groups, so maybe that's part of it too. But yeah, so I think any think tank, I imagine, involving some of that.
Thank you. My name is Shaul Magid. I'm the other professor on the panel. My story it's actually a little bit similar to Elad, and it's different than a lot of other people in that I didn't grow up in the Haredi world. I was about tshuva when I was 19. Actually living in Borough Park, learning in yeshiva, and Naomi and I didn't know each other, but we probably walked by each other in Bachner's on 13th Avenue, because you were in high school and I was studying with David.
Bachner's wasn't on 13th, it was on 16th.
16th Avenue, right. That's how long ago it was.
I don't know this guy, by the way.
Anyway, so I was about tshuva. I was kind of like a little bit of a kind of refugee from Woodstock Nation, and became Haredi and spent a couple of days in Chabad, but decided it was too modernish for me. And left and became a Breslover Hasid, actually, in Jerusalem and in Borough Park. And then subsequently made my way out another exit and ended up becoming a scholar of Hasidut and Kabbalah, mostly because that's kind of what I knew, and it was kind of the easiest path. So I occupy a different space, but I think in terms of my contribution to this larger project, it's that I both bring an experience of somebody who chose to deeply enter into that world, romantically so, and in some way I think that romanticism, a piece of that romanticism still remains, even though I recognize that it wasn't something that I could spend the rest of my life doing. Most of the people that were Balei Tshuva when I was there, that we lived in Jerusalem, almost all of them are still there. And I, I'm one of the only ones that kind of was able to escape in some way, largely because I wasn't married and didn't have children. I think that one of the things I think that I find from having that dual perspective is that I think that a lot of people who grew up in that world could bring, is that I know that a lot of people that grew up in the Haredi world from the Footsteps community leave with very, very bad experiences, a lot of anxiety, a lot of animus, a lot of kind of bile, I think, because of the dark side of that world and the way that it affects people. But what I think that on the other side, what a lot of liberal, non-Orthodox Jews, however you want to call them, really don't have an understanding of what that world is about, the good of what that world is about. All they know is the bad of what that world is about. The New York Times articles about the education. But there's something in that world, which is the reason that I chose to enter into it, that is incredibly powerful, incredibly intense, and can really contribute to the contemporary conversation. Certainly in America, Israel is a different story. Certainly in America, the contemporary conversation of what Judaism is going to be in the next half century. And I think that to sift through all of the bad stuff and to really be able to communicate what that world actually offers. Not only Jews, but offers humanity, can offer humanity. If it's reframed and reconstructed, which is why I eventually ended up drifting to people like Zalman Schachter Shalomi and Jewish Renewal, which is really the neo-Hasidic world. It's like the attempt to kind of sift out a lot of the stuff that's problematic and create something out of the stuff that's good. So I think that I can offer a perspective, and somewhat of a historical perspective, because I work on the Chassidut and Kabbalah from kind of an early modern period. This is something I brought up in the last panel, which I think is true, is that, I just want to say it again for people that weren't here, that most of modern Judaism that we have today in all forms is the product of OTDs. It's the product of actually people who grew up in Orthodox worlds and left. And that created Zionism, it created American Judaism, right, where I teach at Harvard. Harry Wolfson, who was the first professor of Jewish studies supposedly in America, is a classic OTD. I mean, and he was able to use, and many of those people were able to use what they were able to garner from that world to create something for the future.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Chani. One of the hats that I wear is that I'm the scholar in resident at Footsteps. And I think I bring two perspectives. One is, I grew up Hasidic, and I was married off, and I had 3 children in the community, and I was lucky enough to have a therapist in the community that told me to call the police when the time was right. Not everybody is that lucky. And I left with 3 children because I had that kind of therapist. I was 23 with 3 children under the age of 5 when my family closed the door in our face. That's the perspective I bring. And I think we have to talk about that. This is so beautiful that you joined and were romanticized, and this beauty of Hasidut. And I grew up in a community where I sang my entire life, and still, to this day, miss Yom Kippur, because I had ecstatic experiences there. And I also had 3 children under the age of 5 when I was 23, and left with police. That's what I bring. That's one perspective that I bring. I'm also 48. That meant I left a long time ago. And I've been doing this work of holding the both and for all these years. And I hold people through that. And now I train organizations who help people and hold people how to do that. And the first question I always ask is, why do you think people leave? And there's a whole list. And the second question, why do you think people stay? And there's a whole list. And belonging is in both of them. Because the struggle to belong in community and the struggle to belong to self sits on both of those boards. And that is the question. How do we belong? When I left, we were called exos. I'm still on board with calling OTD with all its problems, but we were called exos, and I kind of liked that, right? And I remember walking into a concert and seeing Basia on there and being floored that someone had taken what we grew up doing, literally teaching Chumash, and doing it on stage. And I was like, wow, that's brilliance. But that only comes when we process trauma and we can be on the other side. And that's the conversation. How do we all get to the other side? How do we bring the conversation in so that we don't burn out doing this work and representing all the time? People need to be dentists. They need to not deal with this. But for those of us who are dealing with this, how do we do it in a beautiful way that doesn't feel like only one of us is holding it, but that we're in a group? And that's one of the reasons, after all these years, I'm still at Footsteps, because I'm in a staff of people and we're holding this together. And it's complicated and it's hard and it's messy and it's all these things. And that's the bigger question for the audience today. How, whatever we're doing in our little thing, how do we do it together and how do we support each other?
I'm trying to figure out where to take this. You know, I have my questions on, I have what's happening here in the room, and my water bottles has other ideas too. What I want to let people know is that we want this to be more than a frontal conversation. So we're going to keep talking a little bit more, like, I don't know, 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to give some space and time for both a little individual reflection and conversation with neighbors who you might be sitting next to or someone you don't know in the room, and then come back, because an hour and a half is, especially after lunch, I see you're all tired. Everyone wants a nap. Okay. There are a few threads I want to pick up on. One of the themes we think about is, and actually the original Footsteps logo was a bridge, is the concept of bridging. And I want to offer and ask if the concept of bridging works for OTDers to be bridges. If it does, why? If it doesn't, why? And how we could think about folks moving from the either ors to the both ands, from the romanticization to the vilification. Is Jericho still here, or did Jericho leave? Oh, okay. Years ago, we did a panel at UJA. It was the first time they let us do anything there. It was big. It was a big deal, actually. And Jericho and Naftali, I don't know if he's still here, and some others were on a panel, and the title was Beyond Romanticization and Vilification. Something, I don't remember. They made us change the title because they didn't like the word progressive, which I think is a great word. But the question being can OTDers serve as a bridge to beyond black and white thinking, and what does that look like? And I want to start. Well, is anyone moved by this question that wants to start us off in a different order than we just went? Elad, go ahead. I know, is it on? Is it off?
It's on. So, yeah, I think what you brought up, I think, matters to this question, because I think for some who've made it to a healthy place, I think they're massively equipped in a beautiful way to do that. But I think part of the difficulty, as far as I can tell from looking at the situation, is that a lot of OTDers need a lot of time to process before they get there. And unfortunately, especially the internet and the way discussions happen, can often feel as if the OTD discussion is this angry discussion, because there is that phase. But I do think that the people who are bridging this trauma, who are bringing people onto the next stage, I think are doing incredibly beautiful and holy work. And I think because it's not that everyone has that obligation, but I do think there is that skill of being able to see between worlds. And I think that is something most people don't have, even, secular, liberal, progressive. Most people grow up in one place and stay there, which is not a judgment of them, it's just life. But I think we're living in a time where, I strongly believe we're reshuffling society right now. There's, the communities are moving. It's not just the Orthodox world. Everywhere, people are moving and shuffling around. And I think a big part of that has to do with values. there are people looking for each other outside of their tribe, and they're connecting more based on values. And I think what the OTD community can bring is, what are the reasons they left, and how can they use that to help others, including both the OTD community itself and also the world around them.
I think I hear really what you're saying, and I think there's maybe a distinction we can draw between the individual and the larger collective. I think individually the trauma is really at the center, and how individual lives were negatively impacted by living in that particular community at that particular time. And that should not be downplayed or minimized at all. And energy and resources should be used to be able to deal with people who are traumatized, who are victims of abuse, who are victims of all kinds of other things. I think another question, which is not a replacement for that question, is, as a collective, does the collective of OTDs have anything to offer?
I'm going to get there in a minute, but
yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Judaism beyond, because ultimately, when you leave the Haredi world, when you're part of the Haredi world, you're not really part of a broad Jewish project. You're part of a very particular project of the reproduction of yourself. And then when you leave that, you're part of a broader project, like it or not. And the question is, in what way can that community with those experiences contribute to that larger project? Or many individuals will choose they don't want to contribute to it at all, that they just want to go out and live their lives, which is perfectly fine. But I think for those that want to say, okay, like, what role can I play? I think that becomes a kind of a bridge. That's part of the bridge question. And I think a great deal, but that has to be kind of worked out over time.
Chani, do you have anything, or Naomi here? I have a follow-up also.
So one thing is that, when I was thinking about what this conference could be, I was thinking that the story of leaving Orthodoxy, which obviously is a huge individual story that we all have, that's what popular culture has focused on. And the idea that we're still around decades later, that we're still doing things, and that we have some capacities because we've survived this incredible experience / trauma, that somehow disappears, that we all just fade into the general, we're invisible after a certain moment. And one of the things I was thinking that might be possible if we had some visibility is conversations about there are different things we bridge, and one of them is the frum world, the Orthodox world that we came from, and the communities where we now live, and also our own experiences. There's a lot of silence and taboo among these. I know I myself, I go to my when I visit my family, I barely talk in any kind of open way with anyone. And I thought, well, what if we just talk about it? Obviously we're not, there isn't any evidence that we're coming back. So what happens if we, who are we now? And what do we think about what we went through? And maybe some dialogue is possible. And also with the secular world, the people who come and take tours of Williamsburg, like Frida Weisel's amazing tours, what is it that they could learn about what she says? Is all they want to hear is, how did you leave Orthodoxy? And they don't want to know, like, what does it mean to her now? She's doing a lot of research on this community. And how do we create a richer conversation about what Orthodoxy is? The assumption that we're just like angry people who just want to tear down this community is obviously wrong. It's also wrong that the Orthodox community entirely is just, wants to cut us off and pretend we don't exist. There have been efforts on both directions to reach out to each other. This is part of the changing face of OTD. And let's say the people who've survived the first crazy years, who've, the screaming and the throwing things and the not talking for years, that we have to have better conversations. And that I just think that that's going to be useful in all possible directions.
Yeah. Chani, you're someone who has lots of conversations with people in a lot of directions, so maybe you could build off this one.
I think that we are bridges simply by being who we are. I think that we walk in so many different ways. I think about my kid who is 25 and was the Hillel president and was the only person in that school who was able to get conservative reform and Orthodox to share a meal together. Not a meal, I'm sorry, they always share a meal. Was able to get all of these three to have one hakafa on a Simchas Torah together. And the reason they were able to do that was because they lived in all of those spaces. And they grew up with me moving around these spaces. And they understood what was important to the Orthodox and spoke to them, and then understood what was important to the conservative and spoke to them, and was important. And literally the only person who got them to have one hakafa together. We build bridges simply by showing up, because we get what it's like to move through these spaces. Are we building bridges? I think we're already doing it. My bigger question is like, how can we use that force to a much bigger extent? And the bridges we build is beyond just Judaism, right? My private practice has ex-Muslims, ex-Christians, all of the things, because those people are doing the same thing. We're all walking this path of exiting and embracing and seeing what works for us and what doesn't. And so we are bridging. Every single one of us sitting in this room is bridging by being here and by just living our life.
What you're talking a lot about is code switching, Chani, and that's beautiful and so important. Yeah, let's take a minute to that story of your kiddo it throws me back. I'm like staring here, looking at Jenny. If I could take a minute. Like I also, I was Hillel president at Columbia Barnard back in the day, and there was a unique position that I was able to be in, and it was a painful process to get the community to agree to have a woman making Kiddush on Friday night. That's where we were. Jenny's laughing because she remembers this. But I'll say I was able to do that because I understood the various sides of this, and I was also able to sit my butt in the middle of College Walk, and this was 20 years ago, when the first sides of College Walk started to look like they looked this past year. 25 years ago. Who's counting? I'm still really young, right? I am. I believe that I am. I do think that there is this piece. I asked the question of bridge building because I do deeply believe we can be bridge builders in a ongoingly, increasingly divided world that is ripping itself apart. I put that challenge out to this room. What time is it? We're at 2:10. All right, we've been sitting here for half an hour. I have a lot more questions, but I wanna get the audience thinking. And I imagine you have some sort of implement that you could write with, whether it's your phone, your notes app on your phone, or a pen and paper. That still exists. I want everyone to I'm gonna do a little bit of 2 minutes of reflection. What can you imagine could come next as a next step in terms of some collective action from this conference? How could we put our collective power to use? Take 2 minutes. I'm gonna put on a timer, and if you don't wanna write, just think for a minute, and then we're gonna turn to a group of neighbors and talk for 5 minutes.
Yeah. It's very hard to think that.
my mic off and then it. Take a minute, find someone in the room who you know, you don't know, whatever it is, 3 or 4 people, and talk. And then from there, we'll bring back some of the conversation up here. Ask my question again. Okay. Do you want to repeat it? What do you want, what can you see beyond yourself as an individual, as a collective move that could be a next step from this conference, forget this conference is a piece of it, right? From the collective power that OTD folks as a collective have to offer, okay? What could be something that's not happening already? Okay, maybe it is happening. Maybe you're like, is this happening? Right? If there was some sort of initiative or thing, you can wave a magic wand and someone could fund a something, okay? What could it look like to add on to what exists out there already?
The Canadian government, let's say.
Ooh, the Canadian government. Okay, we're just trying to find the Q&A. Great, beautiful. Okay. There's so much we could talk about. Y'all just want to keep talking? Yeah, they do.
Did anyone do their homework?
Shh. If you could hear me. Oh, this is my 5-year-old has come home starting to do this. Bum, ba-da-dum, bum. That's what, she's trying to get our attention without screeching at us. So I'll take that as a win from her start of her school year. I want to name, we want to hear from the audience, and we're going to take like a little window break because Shaul has to leave in like 10 minutes. So we want to like hear a closing thought from Shaul, and then we're going to go back to the audience conversation. Who talked about something that's a next step that could happen, something dreamy that felt like really exciting to you, and you want to share, or a complication that you want to share? And I actually would love if people grew up to start first. If you grew up Orthodox, like let's just give space to that crowd first, and then we'll have add-ons and add-ons, okay?
There's somebody raising their hand.
Hi. Yeah, I grew up modern Orthodox. I hope that counts for going first.
Say your name.
Oh yeah, I'm Dove.
Hi, Dove.
And
one more thing before you start. Let's try to limit our life stories a little bit for the crowd, just like an idea, okay? Succinct ideas. Thank you, Dove.
cool. Run-of-the-mill modern Orthodox. There we go. That was pretty fast. Yeah, and I've had this idea for a bit and just never got it off the ground, but I would love to see an OTD literary journal.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't want to take up too much time. So
Beautiful.
That's the idea.
OTD literary journals.
And you're the editor, I'm guessing.
I mean, I would love to be
Right.
involved.
Remember, when you have ideas, you will be voluntold about them later. Okay. And then we have up here Javi. If we can get a mic down in this direction. We do want to wait for the mics for accessibility reasons, so thank you.
Hi, I'm Javi Weisberger. I use she, her pronouns. I am an OTD person. Some of the conversations we had in this corner that I think are valuable to bring into the larger sphere is a question of how do we bring the most vulnerable voices into these spaces. Academia is out of reach for most of the people who are actually being impacted by these issues. And so I think a follow-up question might be, how do we use this conversation to prioritize those voices that are still trapped in ultra-Orthodoxy, those people who can't leave because they have the 3 children and aren't as privileged as some of us who got to leave, which is like strange to say, speaking about how awful it is to leave, but most people can't. They're still stuck inside. And how are we ensuring that those voices are the ones who are mentally ill, the ones who are physically ill, the ones who are discarded by society, who are living in ways that nobody is talking about, that are not even close to this conversation? How do we get those voices into the room? And so the academic spaces, the people who are privileged enough to have access to this, how are you bringing those voices into the conversation?
So let's ask of this panel this question, like, how do we think about getting those who are most vulnerable into the conversations? Is that about how do we bring this forward? Chani, you have a thought?
We start by telling their story. I think that's where we start. And you just did.
Storytelling.
And I love that one of the things we can do is make these spaces more dialogic. But just to be clear, I wasn't saying I needed a space that would serve as therapy for me, though I'm very happy to have it. I was saying that I feel that I could give more than I'm giving. So maybe to add to that is that it's always the case that one way to give is to, right, tzimtzum, is to back off. So thank you for saying that.
Any other thoughts from folks on stage?
I think just to the first question, a literary journal, whatever kind of written document that allows those voices to be heard, even anonymously, would be incredibly helpful. I think the idea of telling stories and in a certain way, we in the various places that we occupy within the world that we live in, we have a certain kind of we can be, I'm trying to think of the sports metaphor, like we can be we can serve as catalysts for those that can't tell their stories because of the dangers that they face that we don't face because we stand on the other side. And very oftentimes those stories have to be anonymous for that reason. Then the question is, if they're anonymous, how are they really helping? So it's a complicated thing, but I think that if somehow we can create some kind of context whereby we can reach inside that community and let people know that there are people that want to hear. And I know that Footsteps is doing that and has been doing that for a long time, a little bit, or could do it more. And there are various other ways that it can be done. But the more that those stories are told, the less frightening they are for the people that are telling them.
Go ahead, Elad.
I ran a publication for a bit called Neshamas. And that was an anonymous, it was a place, because we were getting a lot of submissions to Havria that were intense, but didn't necessarily fit the editorial guidelines. So it was anonymous, and it was almost all some kind of story that people just couldn't share with their name attached. And so they were very, very powerful. And I still wonder about that publication in the sense that I think it was good for people to be able to express themselves. I also am concerned about people who are at that stage. And I'm not sure what the responsible way to help them is in that sense, in the storytelling part. Especially because I think as people grow and evolve, sometimes, I know that I've had it sometimes where once they move past a certain stage, they don't want that trauma to be out in the world. And it's not that I have a specific answer to you, or I think it's invalid. I think it's so important, and I think it's more like this work is so sensitive. We're dealing with such pain and such trauma, and especially when someone's in the middle of it. How do we deal with that? I feel like I don't have an answer still. So I just wanted to pose that. So
I'm going to reframe that question, and beautiful, and thank you for centering that. And for lifting this issue up. So how and what does a trauma-informed approach to if we're talking about storytelling now, to getting stories told, what does that look like? I know we think about that a lot at Footsteps. I could ask, like, someone from our comms team to say something, but I don't know. Chani, do you have a thought on what you've taken in from?
So one of the things that we've learned is that it is so therapeutic to tell your story, right? And yet, when we tell our story to more than one person who can hold it, it becomes really complicated because every person in the room then gets activated by whatever it was that was said. And so there needs to be scaffolding around that. And scaffolding looks like prep before, prep after, giving the person permission to say, I don't want to answer that question, really holding them through, right? I don't think it's enough, but I do think that it's something. And there is this desire, real desire to like hear from the most vulnerable and have that. And sometimes it might be better for them to not be on stage, right? And so it's a very, coming back to the both end, right? It's a very nuanced reality because I can sit here now because I've had over 25 years of therapy. And granted, I've been doing this work for 15 years, but even when I started, right? Like there is a way that by the time we tell our story, can we hold our own nuance as well as the nuance of the story, also in the way it lands for people, so we don't traumatize the audience that's reading. Right, like I was hearing a lot what you said about that publication, and I thought it's wonderfully cathartic. And what happens to the person reading it, right? Because that's also injury, and we need to hold all of that, and it's very messy.
I do have to run out in a minute, so I just wanted to say one thing. I don't come to this question with trauma because I didn't grow up with it. And maybe as a result of that, I don't really feel the depths of the pain and the darkness that a lot of people do. So as you said, I mean, there is a romanticization of that world that pulled me into it, and then the realization of the things in it that made it so that I couldn't stay. But it wasn't traumatic. My leaving wasn't traumatic because I had a place to go to, which is where I came from, I suppose. But it just as a parting thought, I do think that we're really on the cusp of something, and if I can speak in broad strokes, I mean, the Haredi world in America is growing and crumbling at the same time. And I think that out of the crumbling, which is the OTD phenomenon that has taken organizational form in Footsteps, and now can think about another stage, another level, a more constructive stage, dealing with the personal trauma, dealing with helping people get GEDs, and all of the therapists and all of that. There's an incredible amount of resource and wisdom that is trapped in a very particular kind of parochial, misogynist place that is on the verge of being or has already been to some extent liberated. And I think that we carry that liberation, and that for the remainder of the time that we're on this planet, we have, the opportunity to make something of it for the next generation. So I'll see you all later. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Shaul, and sorry to say an early farewell, but the conversation should continue, and we're going to continue this conversation. This is not the end of the panel. I want to say in this frame, if I may, in the moderation space, and use that moderator's privilege moment, that I believe that if we invest in everyone, including in the leaders, it will lift up the entire community. even and the most vulnerable, right? And so and sometimes those most vulnerable cannot speak up for themselves, and sometimes telling that story is just too painful. Even sending in an anonymous post into our zine, right? At Footsteps we have a zine, right? Like, so it might be too much for a given moment, and I'm glad you've worried about folks who are at that stage of writing anonymously. It's such care. We have to do it with such care. I'm looking at our team who's on the front lines with folks every day, teetering at the edge. Should I, shouldn't I? What does it mean to walk in the space, to not, to call, to pick up the phone? We have to do it with such care. And it's okay to invest in folks who also, I'm like looking at Beatrice, your speech this morning was phenomenal. Like, and if you didn't get to hear it, I hope it was recorded. Maybe it was so poignant.
Everything's recorded.
What does personal activism look like? And how do we tell that story? And how do we move that into collective activism? So I want to hear a little bit more from folks who feel like they had an idea, they had a question, they want to contribute to this moving forward question. I'm going to go to the back, and then Julie, I see you also.
I'm very aware of my privilege. I should just say that I come from the generation when people who tried to leave Orthodoxy were sometimes put into mental institutions. I don't know if that's still happening, but that happened to me. So I spent 2.5 months in a mental institution as somebody who wanted to leave. I've been homeless. So my, whatever, like the privilege is what I'm actually putting forward now. But the fact that you can, get to where I got after an experience like that is part of what I'm trying to say. So anyway, now.
Yeah.
I just want to, before
And
we go
I
on,
don't often say that, but since
right.
people are
So
being
I
so
wanna
raw here.
I want to pause and say thank you for sharing that little piece. I think sometimes a little piece of personal information helps people understand where we're coming from. So.
Did I mention the part about being homeless? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Naomi. No, it's not small. It's not small to have these moments of like, wait, am I going to share this in this moment? Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Naomi, for being a possibility model.
I love that, possibility models. That's beautiful, really.
Yeah. Took it from like queer culture notions of chosen ancestry and all that good stuff. I guess, so my lots of dreams, lots of hopes, lots of visions, primarily just thinking about the utter aloneness and the nowhere to turn that moment, those moments of that cause madness, that cause, insane grief. And to really combat that, like what I would have needed was, which I plan to go on and create, is like this OTD, intergenerational pluralism, cultural space where we're learning and where we're in dialogue with our community, and where we can learn from each other. And specifically, I had to go out and like, it's working. Like I had to like do this like assimilatory praxis where I was like, I'm no longer Jewish, I'm a queer person. Like I did that thing. And then there was this like, sitting in gender and women's studies at York University in Toronto and learning about Betty Friedan and other like Jewish feminists. And I'm just like, oh, like, this moment of hailing. And then now studying with Naomi and just learning about Spinoza just later on in life, and feeling like, wow, like what if we made a yeshiva that its focus was on these figures and repeatedly, would go through cycles of learning these texts and these works.
Svara for OTD.
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
Svara
Okay.
for OTD. Thank
Got it.
you.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah.
If people hamevin yavin, okay, so if you understand, you'll understand. If not, I can tell you later what Svara is.
Yeah, and for sure. And Svara is such a great example, and because
Just maybe explain what it is. I'm
sure,
sorry.
yeah.
That wasn't meant to be insider speak.
Yeah, so Svara is queer Talmud camp, and they have year-long, around-the-clock like programming over Zoom. But in the summertime, there's like a week where you go and you learn like a pasuk of Talmud. And I actually went and I learned a pasuk of Talmud. Maybe it was more, I forget, it was a while ago. But I learned that Rashi said, Lev Yodea Moras Nafsho. So I could like...
What does that mean?
It means the heart knows the bitterness of the soul. So
Talk about trauma and how, I just want to name, like this is landing, this idea lands for some in this room beautifully, and for others, they're like running for the door right now, right? So I'm just like, and that's beautiful that we could have this conversation. Want to just wrap your thought?
Yeah, for sure. So just basically, like I think I want to be more in dialogue with you. I want to be more, I want to learn. I want to bring my friends, and I want to, do those things. Formally or informally.
Beautiful. Yeah. So one of the things as we're going around, I'm just going to give a little bit of a little advice, which is also like, as you're having beautiful ideas, also seek out what's out there as well, right? We should not be reinventing the wheel. None of us need to, okay? And there's beautiful complementary things happening. I was just upstairs. I don't know if Yair and Avi are here. Maybe they went out for lunch and didn't come back. I don't know. It's fine. We were chatting upstairs, and they said, "Oh, do you know Yossi Klar, who was one of the founders of Out for Change in Israel? He's starting a new organization." Okay. And so someone else asked, is it complimentary? Was it Naftali? Is it complimentary? So that's good, right? Like that's the question we should be asking. Is it complimentary? It is complimentary. It's a very specific thing about complimentary as what else is out there? Do we need this other organization, right? Do we need this new initiative? Like what else is out there? And it turns out it is, and it's about Yotzim trying to figure out if they should go to the army, which is like a very specific issue that Yair brought up earlier. So good, right? If there's a need and there's funding, great. Also, like, let's figure out what we could do together, because it's about the power of the collective. Other questions? I know Julie had her hands up. Other folks before we make it down to Julie? Chevy. Oh, and then, was it Aviva? Okay, Aviva, and then Chevy, and then Julie. How about that? No, I just met Aviva.
All right, so I'm going here first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
So like our comments to
Two
under
second
2
question.
minutes.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
when you originally asked the question, because I'm a therapist and I work with the queer and trans community who are OTD or trying to figure out their relationship to extreme religion. So I would love to have some sort of like way to coalesce other clinicians who are doing this work, because I think like Javi said, there's a lot of people who can't access either our care or their voice can't be because of safety or whatever. Like over the years, there have been groups for women or queers who are trying to know each other, because especially in the Hasidic community or in the Frum community, it can be so dangerous to try to find each other. And so I would love to have some more thinking about how we can connect those people who are still either in the closet of queerness or from like or coming out of from kite or whatever that means. Can we get some of the clinicians together to figure out what we're doing?
I love that, and I'm going to plug, Chani's going to plug some work that we do at Footsteps.
So about a year, maybe a year and a half ago, we started a community of practice for therapists, and we do about 3 CEUs a year. One is coming up, so I'm just going to say, if you're a therapist, September 25th, email me, chani@footstepsorg.org, really easy. We have a community of practice. We get together. We present, whoever is called to present, we have different people presenting on different issues, but all of us work with OTD people. Some of us are OTD, some of us are not, but we all work with, and we're creating a community of practice. So please join us. Please let others know. It's free, and you get your CEU for attending, which for those who don't know is continuing education credits, which we need.
And actually, to get a little meta on this,
Yeah.
this idea came out of the Footsteps convening in January 2020, when we brought all these wonderful people into rooms and we said, wait, like, what are we doing next? And one of the clear things that we wanted to do was communities of practice. So social workers was there, lawyers, Yotzim Without Borders for other practitioners who are working to serve the leaving communities. So yeah, things can happen from conferences. Chevy, Julie, and then we might have to do close. Chevy was there in the middle. Raise your hand.
So I wanted to put my hand down because I feel like what I was thinking has been reflected in what everybody else says, but I'm going to reinforce it in maybe a little bit of a different way. I did write things down in a pen and paper. This messaging is not reaching the communities where we can, those of us who, like Professor Seidman said, are far enough away that we have a story. Post, and I forgot the term that, I can't remember the name up there, said this meant like kind of being a model, that some of us do have that experience. We're not reaching the people who we can help by that, because in Borough Park, Williamsburg, Monroe, Muncie, Crown Heights, they can't go to footstepsorg.org. So how are we getting that messaging across to the people who we can help? Obviously when someone needs to be admitted for, a mental health, that's one thing, but when it's like Professor Seidman said, for a reason that's not real, can we avoid that? Can we avoid the homelessness and all of that? How can we let people who are afraid to leave because they're afraid they won't have a community who can, be Machal Shabbos while discussing, Talmudic texts? How can we let these people know that this exists?
Good question.
Number two, which is a much more practical thing that's on my list, is housing. This is a huge fear of for people. And also to somehow codify this resource list, a step-by-step guide. And I've seen a few of them for people who are ex-Orthodox to get into college, but they're old. The whole college application process has changed so much since these things were written. So what I can do, me personally, what I would volunteer to do, for example, if the word can get out, I live near a Starbucks. I would go there once a month, wear a red rose or a footsteps pin or whatever, however I can be identified, and be like, I can bring something to do or a book to read if nobody shows up. But if they do, I can be like the person, someone who can get on a train and come to secretly and have a conversation. But what are the resources, the good resources that I'm referring them to?
How do people know the resources? This is the conversation we have a lot at Footsteps. Great questions. I think I'm going to leave the foods for thought because we're writing all of this down. I'm not sure that there's an easy answer. I can say that Footsteps is initiating a housing initiative, but these are the types of things. We're not building a building, but we're slowly trying to raise money and get staff in to advise people and then to give increasing pass-through funds to help people. But I think one of the challenges is information, and the more people know what resources are out there and then how do we share out. Julie had a question before. Is it still relevant? It got even shorter, amazing. And then I think, I know that there are a lot of other questions. I'm gonna ask Naomi to share where she wants ideas to go, or I could offer an email address that we could forward things to you with if you want.
I'll be very short. I'm Julie Kay. I'm a legal advisor with Footsteps, and I'm an outsider. I grew up very Reformed Jewish and found my way to Footsteps when I was representing a client who was trying to keep custody of her 2 children. And very grateful for people who have told their stories because it was my education and continues to be. I think given the sort of academic houses and things, I like the idea of something sort of formal and fancy pants that I can use in court, because the worst thing is when people and Footsteps members and others who are my client tell their story and the court doesn't believe them because they fall for this, they're disruptive, they're troubled, they're mentally unstable, all the garbage that is thrown at them. So I love the idea of having credentials and having expert witnesses, but having people who have the letters after their name, but who understand the community, who understand what people are going through and can be that bridge, particularly for people who are at risk of losing relationships with their children.
Thanks, Julie. Okay. We have 13 minutes left. I'm going to ask for final thoughts, starting with Chani and then Elad and then Naomi, and then I'm going to give you a next step.
I'm just grateful to be here. I just want to say that. Like, the fact that this room was buzzing when that question was asked.
Can we have some shout outs to Naomi and Zalman? I don't know how much gratitude they're getting.
I think that when we gather, magic happens. And so figure out who and how we can gather more so that more magic can happen is a big part of my takeaway. You know, in this conversation and throughout the morning, it's like magic happens when we sit down together and have a conversation. Let's do that more often. And to what Julie said, there is a study being done that's going to be very fancy. It's called MOVE. It's co-sponsored with Footsteps and Unchained at Last, and I think someone else, I don't remember.
Columbia, New York Community Trust.
Yes, right. And it's done with Columbian professors. So hopefully we will have that fancy study soon that you can bring to court. I think my closing words is keep meeting and telling your stories. And I also, because I'm up here, I'm just going to use the mic for 1 minute.
Yeah, little shameless self-promotion.
Exactly. I have a book
Gotta do it.
I have a book coming out called Mapito, Embrace Yourself. It's really a book on how to digest your own trauma, and it like moves people through that. It slows us down, as every single person who's read the book so far, who I've given it as a pre-read, has said. It will slow you down and it will make you reflect. If that's the kind of book you would like, you can go onto my website and pre-order. It's called Mapito, Embrace Yourself. And that's my shameless plug.
So, yeah, I also want to express my gratitude. I think I didn't expect this to be so special. This was really beautiful. It was really beautiful to hear everyone share their ideas. And Naomi, thank you so much for making this happen. Thank you for Chani for being so heartfelt, and Lani for putting this together. You know, I really, being in this space and hearing people's ideas, it really reminded me how much special energy exists in our community, and how many beautiful ideas, beautiful people, beautiful movements are emerging and are possible. And I guess the only thing I want to leave you with is that the ideas you're having, they're not just ideas, like they're very possible. Everything you're saying is very possible. And there's a lot of people that want to do it with you. You know, this is being brought up because this is a tangible thing that can be achieved. I think sometimes it can feel intimidating, depending on where you are in the journey. And as far as I can tell, we're all available to you if you need. You can email me anytime. I'm glad to talk to anyone, whether it's emotional or practical. I'm definitely glad to. Just my name @gmail.com. So thank you, everyone.
And Elad is not doing shameless self-promotion, but he's a very skilled storytelling expert. So when we think about storytelling, we should be also thinking with Elad. Yeah. Unless you want to end.
Yeah, no, let me just say something pretty quickly. First of all, I have to write a report, so please send me these ideas by email, naomi.seidman@utoronto.ca. I guess what I have to contribute partly is the ability to write a successful grant, though it's easy in Canada. But I call it a progressive kindergarten. Everybody gets a grant. So I'll just say that I can't tell you how special this is for me. When I left the Orthodox world, I moved to California. I basically lived without OTD community ever. So a lot of the people in this room I've seen pictures of or checked out on websites or seen in documentaries and just so longed for community. So I guess I'll just end by saying that there are probably people like me that don't live in New York that are on Zoom today. Who knows where you are and who knows what you're feeling. Maybe I can guess a little bit of what you're feeling. And I just want to say that you on Zoom land, we see you too. And we're with you in community right now.
Beautiful. Thank you. I also want to close by saying I'm sure there were more ideas than got shared out loud. I'm very sure. And so you could email Naomi. You could also email, my team might kill me for saying this. You could also email connect@footstepsorg.org. And the reason I'm saying it, hold on, is because you might have questions about what we do, because there are a bunch of questions out there. So if you have questions about, does Footsteps do this, you could email that. For ideas about how to move forward from the conference, you should email Naomi. We have some sort of plan to make a plan. No one got that reference? All right, fine. We have a concept of a plan. What's the language? We have a concept of a plan to make a plan. All right, I messed up the language. Okay. I want to thank everyone in this room and on Zoom for being here today. And I'm sure that as you continue with the rest of the day and tomorrow, you'll have more ideas. So keep the ideas coming and flowing, and together we could build it. All right.
And find someone you don't know and choose to gather after this. Keep gathering. Like, find someone you don't know and say, hey, I don't know your story. Maybe we can have coffee or tea. See where it goes. Like, just let's not do this alone.